Dr. Steven Schlossman, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So when you're not off killing zombies at night, what is your daytime profession?
Well, let me just issue a caveat. I don't actually really kill zombies except in my head. I'm required to let you know that they don't exist. I know people always boo, which doesn't seem fair because it's like if you've seen a zombie movie, it's not something you really want. But my day job, what I take really seriously, is I am a child psychiatrist. I'm a physician. I see kids and adults at Mass General Hospital in Boston.
And what is your zombie pedigree?
It's more recent. So I mean, I grew up loving horror movies, loved all horror movies, especially loved zombie movies. In fact, I snuck into Dawn of the Dead in 1979 when I was like 12 years old. Told my parents I was going to see The Jerk, the Steve Martin movie, and then I was too frightened to walk home. I lived in suburban Kansas City, so I called my parents, asked them for a lift home, and they said, why, you just saw The Jerk? And I said, no, I lied. I saw Dawn of the Dead. You have to come get me. I'm too afraid. So they got me home, and then I later learned that the zombie movies have a whole lot of social and political commentary buried in them. Then I wrote this novel, and that led to Mr. Romero picking up the book for a movie.
Oh, so tell us about the novel.
So I wrote this novel called The Zombie Autopsies. It came out in 2011, I believe. Basically, what I wanted to do is I was watching Night of the Living Dead one night, and this was actually during a time that was rough for my life. But my wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She's absolutely fine now, so it's a happy ending. It's an easier story for me to tell. But at the time, it was scary. I couldn't sleep, so I would go downstairs and watch whatever was on TV. And Night of the Living Dead was on because it's always on. It's an eminent domain movie, so you can always find it. And it's kind of like comfort food to me because I love the movie, and I feel like I'd mastered those monsters. I hadn't mastered my wife's cancer. So I watched it, but then it occurred to me that if they were really zombies, we wouldn't shoot them, I hope. We would try to figure out what's wrong with them and make them better. We would try to diagnose them. So I sat down and wrote a fake medical paper.
So as a physician, what are the medical possibilities of a zombie outbreak, like tetrodotoxin levels, viruses, pathogens, or even bacterial infections causing zombie outbreaks?
Yeah, so if you want to play the sort of contagion route, because you remember in the Night of the Living Dead, it was radiation, at least they hinted at radiation, and then from that point forward, people started playing more with contagions. There are a bunch of bugs that sort of come to mind. It would be unlikely for any of these to ever create like a true zombie. In fact, it's fiction. That's why it's fiction. But there are some bugs that come to mind. So you mentioned the tetrodotoxin. That's actually not a contagion. That's a toxin that's in the pufferfish. That's from the old zombie lore, not the stuff that Romero created, but the stuff that still exists in West African and Haitian religion and voodoo religion. That's a poison that takes away your capacity to move and to even breathe at a regular rate. So folks presume you're dead when they don't have the tools to measure it. Those with adequate tools, you can say, hey, these folks aren't dead. They're just breathing more slowly. The germs, that's actually where it gets interesting because you can't nail a zombie perfectly. I mean, the one thing you can't do is you can't raise a dead. Nothing in medicine does that. So nothing's going to make the dead come back to life. But if you take that away, you can actually come up with a kind of cocktail of infections, which, again, would not exist in nature, could maybe be bioengineered in a science fiction novel, that would create that kind of stumbling, shambling, really full of rage and always hungry creature that we see in these movies. And the tricky one there is the hunger, because usually when you feel sick, even when you have a cold, you're not hungry. And yet the zombies are hungry all the time. And it turns out there are bugs that infect the regions of the brain that tell us we've eaten enough and take that sense away. So you keep eating even when you're full.
I may have that.
Yeah, a lot of folks think they do. That's right. And you might actually adenovirus, it's a cold virus, variants of the adenovirus actually lead to morbid obesity in some animals and animal-to-human jumps. So,
interesting. Is there one that goes directly towards like deep dish pizza?
Right. Well, mine goes to ice cream, but they're similar. From the looks of most folks, including yourself, I don't think you have it. But this is not fair. I'm not your doctor, so I should not diagnose.
So in the movies, most zombies are very gruesome in appearance, but not all dead people actually look that awful. Usually, if they die of natural causes, is the mutilation just a Hollywood scare tactic, or is something else going on from a biological standpoint?
Well, because I'm making it up, I can say what I want here. I can tell you from the movie perspective, and when I talk to people like George and other folks in the genre, I've met people like Max Brooks, you make them look gory over time. So they don't start out gory, they just happen to get infected, and then as the infection takes its course, they get gorier and gorier looking. And that actually raises the ethical issues more prominently, because the more something doesn't look like you, the easier it is to kill it. And the easier it is to actually act like you're not killing anything, to say, look, she's already dead, she's not your girlfriend anymore, the usual set of lines that you see in those movies. So it's a Hollywood tactic, but I don't think it's meant to be scary so much as to actually be a little bit troubling in a kind of fun way, in that way we enjoy movies. Because there's always that point in a zombie movie where you enjoy watching them blow the heads off all the zombies. But then you start to feel a little uncomfortable with it, because after all, they're not dead, and they look just like your grandma. So we really have the right to shoot them.
Hey, don't say things about my grandma like that.
Right. I've not met your grandma. They look like someone's grandma.
All right. So now one of my favorite books is the zombie survival training guide, those handbooks that come out. So what are the best ways, in your opinion, to prepare for a zombie apocalypse were there to be one?
It's a great question. So Max Brooks wrote the Zombie Survival Guide. He sort of put this on the map. So I actually owe a lot of this to him, too. He was very kind in sort of helping me when I was working on this stuff. So my answer here will be a lot of what Max says as well. Number one tool, even though this sounds corny and cliched, is your brain. It's stronger than any crossbow, any gun, anything that you're going to have. You're going to run out of ammunition. You're not going. I can't shoot a crossbow. I'm not going to learn to shoot one overnight. Can't even catch a fish. So your number one tool is to use whatever you've got between your ears to outsmart what ought to be a pretty easy enemy to outsmart. They can't even open a window. You could eat a sandwich while you're running away from a zombie. So why do the humans turn on each other? That's the big question. So what you should do is keep that in mind and try not to turn on each other. That's step number one. And then step number two, and this is actually the thing the CDC capitalized on, is the preparation for a zombie outbreak, which ain't going to happen, is the same as the preparation for an apocalyptic event or a natural catastrophe or something, which do happen, earthquakes, floods, other pandemics. So the preparations are almost identical. You fill your, if you ask Max what you do, he says, I fill my bath with water, like you would in San Francisco in case there's an earthquake, because you don't know when the water's going to run out. Those kinds of steps, those kinds of thoughtful steps that aren't driven by fear, but are more driven by careful planning, that's your best tool.
Now, Robert Kirkman puts the survivors on The Walking Dead through some of the most horrific situations, pushing humanity to its limits. Do you think they behave pretty accurately given the situation that they're put in?
It's such an interesting question. So yes and no. The extent we don't know anybody who's ever been through anything like that, thank God. What I find fascinating is the way certain people change as a function of this new reality that's in the movie. So would Shane have become the sort of dark soul that he became in The Walking Dead? Would he have gone that way? We don't know. He never had to face the undead. He never even thought he'd sleep with his boss's wife. So all of these things sort of come downstream. And in that respect, I think we can draw some conclusions that this is what we'd see. I mean, one of the most interesting characters to me is the boy. Who watches his mother die, actually participates in getting that baby out, and then having to kill or deanimate his mother. That's a really powerful scene. And then that boy is a different kid when he walks out of the room.
Yeah, Carl turned into a badass. That's for sure.
He did. And how does the first episode of the next season open? With the barrel of his gun staring at you out of the TV. So he's changed into something. And I wonder, as a child psychiatrist. Is what he's turned into good? Is necessary the same thing as good? And I actually like those kind of profound questions coming out of what might seem like a relatively lowbrow issue.
So going to current events, our latest real-life zombie scare has been caused by bath salts. Does this count in your book, or does the zombie label require the person to, be 100% dead?
Well, no, in my book, no one's dead. They're infected, but death is a kind of a definition. So what I did is I had the UN get together. This is actually what got George interested in it. We were going to play with words and ideas as opposed to the concepts themselves. So what I mean by that is if we basically decide death as a religious thing, it's an evangelical thing. So in the book, there's a faux UN conference that gets together and says, we're going to declare people in the fourth stage of this disease dead. We're just going to say they're dead, even though we know they're not. They're walking around. But once we say they're dead, then we have the freedom to do with them what we want because they're not living. So it's this kind of ethical line that becomes easier to cross simply by changing the definition. But then the rub of the book is that it's not that easy to cross. At the end of the day, these are people you once knew that you're operating on, and they're not really autopsies. Autopsies are on things that are dead, and they're moving and looking at you. So they must in some way be alive, and that's what takes its toll on the characters. Bath salts, that's different. That's an ingestion. I will sometimes say to folks, if somebody comes into your emergency room and they're looking and acting like a zombie, if you don't get a tox screen, that's your first thing to do. Check their toxicology, see what they ingested. And when I've talked about this stuff to physicians, especially like emergency room physicians, they'll say things like, that's bath salts, or that's methamphetamine, or that's some ingestion until proven otherwise.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna guess on your answer to this question. So zombies, will they ever exist on the Earth? Are they fact, or are they just purely fictional?
Do you want to guess first? You want me to answer?
I'm going to say, based on the number of times you said this is totally fictional, that it is in fact fictional.
Right. So I think, so here's it's exactly that. Yes, it's fictional, but it is one of the most powerful metaphors I've come across. I love stories. I used to teach high school English. I write stories. I wrote about vampires before I wrote about zombies. I think zombies are a very potent metaphor for what we can become. So I think, as with a lot of fiction, they speak more truth than the truth does. I know that sounds like something you'd hear in Kung Fu, but to me that feels very real. That sort of walking, shambling around lack of animus is the way we increasingly appear to each other, which makes it that much easier for us to do damage to each other, and that's not good.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people follow all of your work online?
At the creatively named thezombieautopsies.com, which is the name of the book. And then also there's a website, which I haven't been so good at keeping up, called stephenschlossman.net.
Thank you. I appreciate you being on the show. Well, I know George Romero and Robert Kirkman will disagree, but Dr. Schlossman assures us that zombies won't ever walk the earth. But just in case he's wrong, I wanted Lacey Green's advice on how to deal with a zombie lover. And in fact, I even changed my shirt. It's green. Get it? No? So Lacey, people seem to love zombies, but what happens when someone you love turns into a zombie?
You know, when your partner starts, eating brains and expressing some weird, skin conditions and just gets a little strange, I think that's a good time to reassess if you really want to be in that relationship. You may not like brains as much, so that's a good time to say, hey, maybe we don't have that much in common anymore.
But isn't it important to kind of, discover new interests through your relationship, kind of like see the other side of things?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, but I feel like you got to know where the line is, so decide that before you get into a relationship. And then when you start seeing zombie tendencies, just know how far you're willing to go. And at that point, when you reach your threshold, pull back.
So how would you deal with this kind of thing, other than kind of reassessing the situation? Would you pull a Romeo and Juliet and go down together? Would you be like, okay, you're a zombie, I'm a living human, this is just how it's going to have to be, I'm not going to turn zombie for you? What would you do?
Personally, I really like being alive. So I'm not ready to be undead yet. I think I would have to say, sorry, bro, you're on your own with that one.
They just had that whole movie come out, Warm Bodies, that was actually based on a book, which is, human girl, zombie boy relationship. I haven't seen the movie yet, and I don't want to spoil it for the audience, but it does seem like that would maybe be a potentially disastrous combination. Yeah.
I mean, anytime you're getting with someone who is totally different from you, who's dead, it causes, some unique challenges in the relationship. So I'm curious to see that movie and see how that relationship plays out.
Though sexually, that dynamic sounds kind of dangerous, with the rampant infection, the disease, the decay. It seems a little gross.
Yeah, really, really want to wear your condoms on that one. Just do not compromise when it's a zombie. You know what I'm saying?
Now, The Walking Dead and Warm Bodies, both, of course, premiered recently with the new half season of The Walking Dead. Why do you think it's happening so close to Valentine's Day? Is there any reasoning behind that? Any correlation?
I don't know. It is sort of strange. The only thing I can really think of is maybe love and death. They just sort of go hand in hand sometimes.
Now, I recently watched your Sex Plus episode on orgasms. Can zombies do that?
Personally, I've never met a zombie, and I think it's sort of under-researched, about zombie orgasms. If I had to guess, I'd say probably. I mean, if you can walk around and eat people, you can probably orgasm, hopefully. Otherwise, distance.
I think I'm going to disagree with you on this one, because I think one of the general things we know about zombies is that they no longer have, the blood isn't really flowing through their body anymore. They've kind of hit some kind of stasis. True. So there's not going to be a lot of engorging of...
You're right. Maybe with no blood, it would be sort of hard to have an orgasm. So I'm gonna defer to you on that one, Brad. I think.
All right, thanks, Lacey, for being on the show. Be safe out there.